One of the points made in one of the readings I did was about the unevenness of who's joining up with the Shakers. And by 1900, for instance, women were 72% of the Shakers. So what? All right. So why do you think that might be? Why could you imagine this being more attractive to women?
And women who couldn't marry, who didn't find somebody to marry, don't have to take care of themselves in the same way, and get taken care of, part of the group.
There have always been more nuns than monks.
Oh, there have been, yeah.
The Industrial Revolution. I mean, you know, again, this started in a particular place. America was a tabula rasa. By the 1875, there were railroads and there were opportunities for men to move around and do all kinds of things, and women weren't really allowed in the workplace in the same way. So the workforce, the national workforce, was a more fluid place.
Or to the extent they were, it was very dangerous.
Now the numbers for men go up during economic crisis, times of economic crisis.
Economic crisis, sure.
So why would that be?
No work. Surplus labor.
No work. So this is a place to work. So there are somewhat different motivations here. All right. So the last, I know we're over time already, but
since we are, can I just add?
yes.
The male-female thing too does add. When you're running largely an agricultural community, you can hire men laborers to run the farm while the women still maintain the household. If you can't flip that around, you can't have a bunch of Shaker men who are out doing farming and hire women to come in and do the housework, which you could, but I mean that just wasn't as convenient. So I think it was easy to get the society skewed the other way.
See, but I'm at that point about allowing men to come in and work the fields,
Yeah.
going back to this whole point of the friction, I would think that these are people that are not followers of the same
And
beliefs.
the
They
Shakers
don't come.
hated them. It was a necessity, but they were, you know,
It made them
the
very
hired
separate
men.
classes,
Oh, they were
didn't it?
just evil. They were just, you know, they were a necessity, but it was a terrible thing when they had to have hired people come in and do work.
They didn't hate the people specifically, just the
No,
concept.
just the concept of
Concept
not
of
being able to
bringing,
have
of bringing.
And they didn't have to live in the house. You know, they weren't, you know, they were sort of at least out. You know.
So this is from the perspective of Sally Keach, who wrote something called Chaste Liberation. And for those of you interested in the feminist perspective on the Shakers, this is a very interesting book. But she's saying that first, celibacy offers both sexes a chance to temper their symbolic gender identities and become more balanced human beings. That was, in a sense, I was hearing that in the room. And though the need for food and shelter was identical for women and men, their ability to meet it independently is not. Thus, women may have been more historically willing to sacrifice their sexuality for economic reasons, and we got at that a little bit. And then she talks about the freedom from reproductive restrictions, the danger of pregnancy and childbirth. And then she points out that 19th century marriage may have been more discouraging to women than to men. So these are some of the ideas of a feminist thinker on this thing. So anything else people would like to say before we close? And thank Max and Betsy so much for hosting us about celibacy, Shakers, gender, celibacy.
One interesting gender issue is the motherhood and the original inspirer and me being a woman. And how does that change the woman? How does that change the movement compared to how it might have been if it's for a man? For instance, we read, I think this was a time of more gender equality in numbers, that more women would go into trance and be inspired, have visions. Well, is that somehow related to this having been started by a woman? What other influences?
What do you think?
With that, well, I think it does. That men somehow didn't have the same invitation for religious revelation as women, and you wonder, does that have something to do with this being a women-initiated movement?
What do you all think? What do others?
It's a good point.
You agree?
I agree, very good point.
Well, when we went to the seance, 75% of people around that table, around the room were women. There were very few men around that room.
And many churches say that the membership is mainly female, right?
I would say it's almost any church,
Any religion,
predominance.
women, yeah. Anything else?
I think it's a very complicated subject that's hard to pin down, because I don't feel fully satisfied about our discussion in a way. I feel like it's just not, it's not all there. I don't have a grasp on it. I want to read more, I want to understand more.
Gender and sexuality can't be covered in an hour and 20 minutes. I don't understand.
That part I got.
Well, has this discussion made you think about anything differently about the Shakers and or celibacy?
Every time I read something about the Shakers, I start
Think of
thinking
something
differently.
different.
I find it's such a superficial thing to start approaching the Shakers, you know, such beautiful furniture, things like that, and then to delve into it and people saying, "Oh, celibacy, they must have been crazy. They must still be crazy. I don't know, why would they do this?" And now
And then you see their chairs and you,
well,
that's why they did that.
You understand the context of their thinking and their time period and what their goals were, and it's phenomenally fascinating to me. It grows more fascinating the more I learn.
Well, one of the things that we really didn't discuss that was thrown out in the stuff we read is the notion that childbearing or not having children is consistent with feminism. In other words, there's this notion that celibacy fosters feminism because women are not burdened by raising children, and I mean, we haven't
looked
explored
at the
that.
modern feminist view of celibacy yet. We can do that another time.
Okay.
So, we have another session when?
Let me mention, our next session is April the
17th.
17th, thank you. And George and Adele Wayland have agreed to host it, and it's a real treat because they live in the Center Family Forge at Mount Lebanon, so our next talk will be at Mount Lebanon. And I was saying, we'll probably, assuming it's a pretty day, we'll figure out a way to take a walk up and down the road or something for those of you who I know haven't been there. We'll get a sense of the place a little bit more than we have had. And the topic will be, and unless the readings lead us in another direction this time, we'll be pessimistic. So.
Okay, and thanks to Jerry for putting together such a good set of reading and for being our
Very
in-house
good.
expert and
I think the
David
article
for
by
having us
Lawrence,
organized.
was excellent.
It's interesting because Larry Foster,
Was it?
yeah,
Yeah.
Was it Larry?
Yeah.
Larry?
Yeah.
I'm sorry, yes.
Larry's somebody
I got
that
the wrong way around. I just
that
said
when I've heard him speak and some of his articles, it was the male perspective on women, which was one reason to look at him. He's about the only male writer who's really taken on the issue of Shakers and feminism, Shakers and women's issues. And the other thing is, he doesn't particularly like the Shakers, which was, I didn't think it really came through
on this reading.
as much in that reading as some of the times I've heard him lecture, but they're not his favorite group, I think, which is sort of, fun. He feels, I think they got thrust upon him by some professor in college. Never quite got over it. I have my last little wrap up, which is, just because most of us live in New Lebanon or close up New Lebanon, is, in the middle of the 19th century, you would have known these people.
Yeah.
You would have come to the store, the little store down at the, where the pizza place just burned down and now it's gonna reopen down the thing. You would have gone there, and met Shakers. You would have been up on the mountain and you would have talked to
Do
celibates.
they look different, by the way? Do they dress
Well, they
differently?
dressed differently, and the men had, the women would have had bonnets, so
In
you
fact,
would have known them.
Yeah,
I mean, similar. Yeah, you would have recognized them on the street, and you would have known them, and you would have probably known people who had family members who lived there. And so your relationship and your understanding and ability to converse with them about these things would have been heightened in having them right there. So, a lot of our ancestors in this town and neighbors, had that experience of getting to know the Shakers firsthand and see what that life was like, experience it. So
And the Shakers talked freely about their celibacy. I thought that was interesting as I got.
one of the most interesting little snips, and I think we don't need to do audio visual with this group, but But Sister Frances Carr at Sabbath Day Lake and the Shakers go into the schools and talk about Shakerism, and they do crafts, and they do a bunch of